What's going on, everybody, and welcome into the 128th episode of the CRZY podcast. As always, I'm your host, Stephen Gates, and this is a show where we talk about creativity, leadership, design, and everything else that helps to empower creative people. Now, remember, you can listen to the shows, get the show notes, and a whole lot more. Just head over to thecrazy1.com. That's always the words, the crazy, and the number 1.com. Now, also, whenever you're on your favorite podcast platform, make sure you hit the subscribe button to get the latest episodes whenever those come out. And do me a favor, and while you're there, leave a review. It lets people know that this show actually helps other people, helps people find the content, get the message out, and makes me feel like all of this is really worth the time. And so, for those of you who've been listening to the show in real time, well, hello again. It's been quite a while since I've done that intro, and it feels a little bit strange. Since the last time we've talked, not much has changed. I think things out there are still as crazy as the last time we talked. I think layoffs are still rampant. The hiring process is as broken as ever. Companies are tightening up their budgets. They're not hiring. Whenever they do, they're not quite sure how to do it, and so much more. So I think what's it's been? It's been like 8 or 9 months, I think, since the last episode of the show. Because you may or may not know, depending on if you follow me on social media or if you listen to some of the last shows, but since then I started my own strategy and design studio. And I've got to be honest, I feel almost guilty in saying that move was long overdue for a lot of different reasons. But the bottom line is, look, I'm having a ton of fun. I'm getting to work with some amazing clients. I'm doing some work that I'm incredibly proud of and can't wait for everybody to be able to check out. And you know what the reality is? I don't think I've been able to truly and honestly say that in, 5 or 10 years at least. Plus, on top of all of that, and it just occurred to me, this is the first time that I've recorded a show since I left New York City. In, the end of December, moved back to my hometown of Pittsburgh after a 4-year process to try to build our dream home. So this is in my same setup, but new studio and new view, but same cast of characters with Oogie under the desk and Crosby over there asleep. So the more things change, the more things they stay the same sometimes, I guess. But look, whenever I sat down to write this episode, and honestly, it's like all the episodes that I do, I started by doing some research, and I looked up a lot of articles and advice, because since I've started that studio, a lot of people have come to me and had questions about how did I do it, or how do I like it, or what do they need to think about, or they're thinking about going out on their own, because so much in the job market just is so screwed up right now. So I said, you know what, look, let me go see what advice is out there. Let me go try and do some research. And I found a ton of articles that were that sort of 7 easy steps to starting your own studio, or the 12 things to do whenever you become a freelancer. And look, we're just going to skip over why the word easy would be in any of those sort of headlines. But for me, there's a massive problem with a lot of these, right? Because there's a lot of talk about, designing your logo or designing your marketing or what platform you should host your website on. Yeah, look, don't get me wrong. Those things are important. They're things you need to think about. But the reality is that if you're thinking about starting your own gig, right? If you're thinking about becoming a freelancer, a consultant, starting your own studio, starting your own agency, right? Sort of whatever it is you want to call it, there's some really important stuff you need to think about. And the reality is, at least for me, what your logo is, what the name of your company is, yeah, it's important, but it is nowhere near the top of the sort of things that you're going to need to think about to be successful. So in this episode, that's what I want to do, is I want to take a look at what are some of those foundational questions you need to ask yourself. What are some of the things that you're going to need to figure out what sort of business do you want to be able to create? And I'm going to share some of the insights and things that I've learned along the way in sort of starting my own gig that hopefully are going to help people figure this out. And look, and I think honestly, for so many people when they want to come talk to me, because they're thinking about going out on their own. They're thinking that what they're doing, that their current job just isn't doing it for them anymore, right? They're not happy. They don't feel creatively fulfilled. They're just, they feel like just it needs to be different, right? And I think that was very much how I felt. So a lot of them said, look, how do I know if I want to go out on my own? So let's start there. Because whenever I sat down and thought about this, the answer to that question isn't what I thought it would be. Because the answer to that, or how do you figure that out, or the advice I give, for me, really focuses in on one moment. And it's a really interesting moment for me because the moment is that moment when I first wake up in the morning. It's that moment when my iPhone starts to go off with that like alarm noise that even when you hear it in like TV shows and movies, you still like some part of you has a visceral reaction because it always sort of like jolts you out of your sleep. So it's the moment that immediately follows that. Because what I realized whenever I felt like going out on my own was the right thing to do is whenever I reflected back on over the last job or two or three or whatever it was, what would often happen is that alarm would go off and I'd be laying there in bed. And I would start to do that sort of mental index, taking stock of the day that was to come. I'd start to think about my calendar. I'd start to think about the meetings. I'd start to think about whatever problems were I had to deal with on the team or whatever politics I was going to have to try to diffuse or, whatever budget I was going to have to go fight for or what stakeholder was being difficult or, rarely did I think about, what was the creative work I had to go do or, what was some idea that I was excited to go work on. But that was such a telling moment because so often what I found myself doing in that moment of sort of taking stock of the day to come was I found myself really trying to figure out how am I going to survive the day, right? What meetings could I be off camera for? What were the things that I didn't necessarily need to do so that I could actually do something creative? I could spend time with the team. I could work on an idea. I could do those sort of things. But that was the thing, right? Is that so much in that moment was trying to hype myself up for the day, trying to figure out how I was going to survive what was to come, try to figure out those sort of things. Now, I fast forward 12 or 18 months later. And look, and I recognize that there's definitely always something to hindsight being 2020, but it's such a difference now. Because now whenever that alarm goes off in the morning and I'm laying there in that same moment, it's something where I get to think about the idea that I get to go work on. I get to think about the client who I love to meet with. I get to think about the project that we're working on that's going to launch something really, really cool, right? Like I'm so grateful and excited to get into the day, and I'm grateful and excited to be able to get to go work on this stuff, to have fun, because I've fallen back in love with leadership and fallen back in love with design and these concepts that, to be quite honest, I was really questioning if these were things that I really still loved. Well, the reality is I love them more than ever, right? I'm still just as good as them as ever. I'm still, they fuel me and fill me up in a way that few other things do. It was just the fact that I had become such a politician, interventionist, those sort of things, much more than a strategist or a creative or the things that I love to do or that I'm good to do, that I had just really sort of gotten away from those sort of things. So that's often my advice, right? Like whenever people say, and look, and I'm assuming you downloaded this episode, you've listened to it this far, because this is something you've been contemplating. Well, that's what I would say, right? Pay attention to figure out what are those moments for you. Because it can be an interesting moment whenever because I think your gut instinct when people say, are you happy, is just always to say yes, right? Like who says no to that? But maybe happy is the wrong word. Are you fulfilled? Are you inspired? Do you feel like you're learning, you're pushing yourself, you're doing something new, that you're growing, that you're doing all those things that light us up as a creative? If the answer to that is yes, then I am sincerely happy for you, because that can be a tough thing to be able to find. And whenever it happens, I always really am happy for and celebrate the people who have it. But if you don't, right, then I think that maybe you want to keep listening to this episode and start to think about what is it that you really want to do. Now, before we get into talking about you becoming a freelancer consultant, starting your own studio, like consultancy, whatever it is, I just want to make a couple things clear right off the top here, right? So first off, parts of this episode are going to talk about setting up a business in the United States. Now, I know that there's a lot of people who listen to my show who do not live in the United States. So what I want to tell everybody is that with everything that we're going to talk about here, you need to go talk to professionals. So that this is going to be people who understand the laws. These are going to be people who understand like the accounting. And they need to understand this stuff for your state or your country because these things are going to vary. Now, you may have just had a visceral reaction of going like, ooh, Steve, like that, I just want to be creative. I just want to draw. I want to have fun. I don't want to think about business. Well, the reality is, and again, we're going to talk about this here in a minute, this is an inescapable part of what this is. If you want to be protected, if you want to be successful, these are conversations you're going to have to engage in. Now, the other part of this is that, look, what I want to make sure that everybody does is that this is just advice, right? I'm not a financial professional. I'm not a lawyer. What I'm just going to do is to tell you the things to think about. But again, what I want you to do is to go to do your research, to be able to go to talk to these people, because we are talking about things that will have a direct impact on you, your family, your livelihood. So you need to do your research. You need to talk to professionals and be sure that you have the best plan for your situation and where you live. Do not wing this and do not go into it blindly. Because again, I think that there's a lot of important things to think about here. Now, what is going to come with that and what may have already started with just that last little bit of a disclaimer that, again, I want to call out, is that with all of this, and even sort of what we're going to talk about in this episode, this is going to be a lot, right? Like overwhelmingly a lot for a lot of people. And like I said, I'm assuming that you downloaded this episode and you're listening to it this far because this is something you're interested in. Well, the good news is this is a podcast, right? So we're going to cover a lot of ground in a small amount of time because, again, we just are going to sort of touch on the tops of things to get you going in the right direction. But the thing here is that you can stop this. You can come back. You can review it. You can take notes. You can look at the show notes, right? Because my advice with this is to go as quickly as you need to, but also make sure you give yourself to think about all the things we're going to talk about. Know that there are going to be some clerical parts like setting up an actual business. They're going to take a little bit of time. But again, you can always come back. You can restart the show. You can listen to it again. And the biggest thing in this moment, and it's the same advice that I give new leaders, I'm going to give you in this moment. The one thing that you need if you're going to set off on this journey more than anything is you just need a plan. Too many people think they need to have everything figured out. They need to have all the answers. They need to have everything figured out before I can start. That is not going to happen, and it's not going to be possible, right? Think about this like a design problem. We have a complex problem. We need to be able to figure a bunch of things out, and we're going to go through a process to figure it out. We're going to try some things that are going to work. We're going to try some things that aren't. We're going to keep the things that work, iterate on them, keep growing and going, but that we have a skill set that can be successful at this. If I can be successful at this, so can you. But I think it may mean that you've got to get a little uncomfortable, right? It may mean that you need to start more like a business owner who is a designer or a creative as opposed to a designer or creative who happens to have a business. And we're going to go into this later, right? But if you want to be successful, then it means that you're going to have to do this type of business. You need to think about how you're going to set up your business. How are you going to do these things? And like I said, along the way in the episode, I'm going to sort of share my insights on this. But trust me, if I can do it, you can do it. So look, enough with the disclaimers. So let's start with some basic questions. And I think just like with any design problem, we always start off with some pretty basic questions that interestingly sound very simple, but the answers can be rather complicated and a little bit deep. So I think, there's a few things that I always want people to start to think about whenever you go into this. The first is, simply enough, how long do you want to do it? Because I think whenever you start, the answer to this may vary. You may not even be sure about this. But look, is this going to be something that's temporary to get your next job? So it's more project work or that sort of freelance work? Do you want this to be your future and something where you really are going to go out on your own? You would be the master of your own destiny. Are you not sure? And honestly, I think here again, this is where I'm going to start to share. Like for me, it was the last answer. Because even for somebody who does this show, and look, I'm not going to sit here like everybody else does. Like, I knew this all along. I knew that I always want to do this. I was destined to go out on my own. I was not, right? That was not the case. I think for those of you who have kept up with my story at all, I got laid off about 18 months ago, went out, got laid off on a Friday, went out on a Monday, was very public with what that was, did a whole lot of interviews that did not go well, couldn't find anything that I liked. And so the reality was what happened was I had just started kind of doing some consulting and doing some freelancing because I'm a big believer that you need a plan A, a plan B, a plan C. So for me, plan A was get a full-time job. Plan B was do freelancing until plan A works. Well, the reality was that I started actually having a lot of fun doing freelancing. I started working with a lot of really great people, and those people sort of came to me and were like, Steve, hey, dumbass, if you said that you wanted to do this all the time, and if you actually, this wasn't a temporary thing, like we would sign a retainer, or we would actually like to work with you on an ongoing basis. And it was like, wait a minute, maybe I can go out on my own. Because for me, where I'm in my career, going out on my own was not something that was appealing to me, especially whenever all this first happened, because, I'll be honest, all I could see was what I could lose. Look, I'm further on in my career. I have a home and a family and people who depend on me and other things like that. That is something I can't put in jeopardy for me to suddenly be like, hey, I'm going to go take on all this instability and to be able to do all this sort of uncertainty and, feel like, we'll figure it out. But that was the thing, was that I really started to recognize how institutionalized my thinking was, how risk averse I had become, how I couldn't even see what was sort of right in front of me that I was doing and loving and having fun with. And it really sort of leads into the next thing that I think you need to think about, which really is, what is your tolerance for risk and uncertainty? And, like I said, for me, I sort of felt like going into this that my tolerance for that is pretty low. And I'll be honest, it still sort of is, right? But how much instability can you handle? Do you need to know how much you're going to make like a constant paycheck like you have at a job? Can you handle the ups and downs that come with more project-based work, where like some months are really great and some months are really lean, and some months you feel like you're phenomenal, you're on top of the world, and the other months when nobody's calling, you don't know why you feel so like untalented. And then again, I think if this is someplace that I'm being honest, this really is something that I'm not a huge fan of, that level of instability, right? Now, I'm fine with the ebb and flow of some of that, but as we'll get to in a minute, part of what I had to recognize in myself was I did like to be able to not just have the financial stability, but part of what I also really wanted was I wanted to work with clients on an ongoing basis. I didn't like the transient nature of project work where it's like, hey, come in and do something, and then thanks, like, go away. I'll do it. I mean, it's fun. If you can work with teams consistently, then that's definitely better. But like for me, I want that experience to be able to live with the brand and work with the brand and be able to work with them and invest in them, and they invest in me and I invest in them, and it's a real partnership and it's about trust, because those for me are the hallmarks of where great work comes from. And then there's also, like I said, the byproduct of whenever there is that consistency, there's not those big emotional swings that I don't tend to enjoy. Well, then I think the last thing you need to really sort of think about is who's in this with you? Are you going to go out solo and do it on your own? You're going to do it with a group of people? I think there's pros and cons to be able to do both of those. Going out on your own, you're the only one you have to look out for, right? Like with a group, there's more overhead. There's more people where you have to split the money. There's sort of more things that go into that. I decided that I wanted to go out on my own. So my studio, I'm the only full-time employee, but that does not mean that I work alone. I do a hybrid model where I decided that for my studio, I wanted to pull in expertise. I wanted to work with my friends. I just wanted to do cool shit with cool people. But I was just going to pull them in whenever I needed them. I was going to keep them on a 1099 so that I wasn't carrying a whole bunch of overhead, because that was going to allow me to be more nimble. It was going to make me more appealing to my clients because I'd have a different pricing model, right? So again, that was one of those things where for me, I just wanted to be able to do it, I guess as a company on my own, but then still be able to do it with other people. But like I said, be able to bring them in, bring them out. If you're in the United States, I basically 1099 everybody, because then that gives me a little bit more flexibility on how to work. So, like I said, I think those are some of the big things to think about. But now let's get into sort of what are some of the other details that I think you need to sort of think about, because they're going to influence some of the other things that you're going to need to figure out. Things like, are you going to be remote? Are you going to be hybrid? Are you going to do in person? How much are you willing to travel? Like for me and everybody that makes up the studio, we're all remote, but we are all willing to travel to meetings, photo shoots, video shoots, be on site with people, do, offsites and meetings, whatever that needs to be, because there's a lot of value in being able to do that. But, everybody we work with is extremely geographically diverse. Other things, and this sort of goes back to, is it just you or is it a group? What are you going to call this thing? Is it going to be your name? Is it going to be a company name? So again, here for me, I did not go with Stephen Gates Design. One is because that creates something that feels a lot more egotistical than what I wanted. Because to me, it feels like it puts me significantly above the other people I'd bring in. I don't want that kind of like cult of personality sort of thing. I also think that companies like to work with other companies. So for me, the agency name is a derivative of my brand. So the studio is called CRZY, which is obviously a derivative of this show and then derivative of my brand, because I wanted it to be linked to my brand, but I didn't want it, like I said, to just make it all about me, because then I felt like that did a disservice to the other people that I work with. It did a disservice to the way that I wanted to work. It did it, again, for me, that it was about partnership, that I didn't want sort of my one entity to be my name and another entity to be a company. So for me, again, it was about I wanted some of those sort of balance. But a lot of this really went back to, because at the end of the day, I think the biggest thing you need to think about is what's going to set you apart from everybody else. There's a lot of people who are laid off. There's a lot of people who are thinking about going out on their own. There's a lot of people who, want to try this and do agencies and things like that. But at the end of the day, honestly, why is anybody going to give a shit that you're doing this? And this is essentially your brand, right? These are all the conversations we've had about your personal brand and things like that are now applied to a company. And that's why, like I said, is I think at the end of the day, I'm not as concerned about what somebody's logo is or even what they call it, but I'm much more focused on, again, what are you going to do that's going to make you different? And now I think whenever you sit down and do this, my process was, part of what I wanted to sit down and do is to really think about, how do I want to work? How do I like to work? Also, how do I hate to work? And what are the things that I don't like? And, the things that really came up for me were the ability to work on a lot of different projects, to be nimble, to be able to have a lot of variety in that work, to be able to really partner with people, to really be able to kind of have them invest in me and for me to invest in them. That it really was about building a partnership. That it was also about I really felt like I can deliver very big results, the sort of thing that you would get out of a big agency or a big consultancy or those things because of my experience, but I can do it in a way that is much more nimble, that maybe comes at it creatively from a little bit of a different angle, that we can do it with smaller groups that are less expensive, and to be able to do a lot of those sort of things. So for me, that then led into really kind of my business model, where for me, my clients buy my time, meaning that instead of coming in and doing a project and saying like, hey, we're going to do a website, what they say is like, look, I would like to be able to buy 25% of your time every month. There's a 3-month minimum. And what we're able to then do is to say, great, over that 3 months, we're going to work on the website using that amount of time. Now, I do that for a couple different reasons. One is just because I found like with project work, this scope is pretty much never what you think it is. That it always changes. The problems are always different. Sometimes there are problems with design and strategy. Sometimes it's culture. Sometimes it's the business. Sometimes it's with the team. That what this allows us to do is to be able to work on whatever those problems are without me having to come back and say, oh, now there's a coaching, here's a coaching SOW, or here's one for, organizational design or whatever that is, right? It's just we are in this as a partnership, and that we are both saying that we are going to invest in each other. For me, it's a really great litmus test to figure out what a clients really want. Because at the end of the day, for me, it is about that trust. Like if we're going to do great work, if we're going to do those sort of things, we both need to invest in each other. And so that's a lot of it for me, and is like, it is the ability to set up teams that are more nimble, to be able to set up processes differently, to be able to come in and work in that sort of consultant yet a partner fashion, to be able to deliver top tier creative. These are all the things that sort of sets our work apart. And that is then what the studio stands for. Yes, the logo is nice and I like it and it's colorful and whatever that is. But at the end of the day, my clients don't really give a shit about that, right? They want to know how are we going to show up? What's the work we're going to do? What's the impact we're going to have on their bottom line, on their culture? How are we going to come in and be that force multiplier that's going to be able to take their brand in a whole different direction? That's the stuff that they care about. But that's the stuff that's harder. And like I said, it is a blend of what do you want to do? What do you need to be successful? How do you need to show up to do great work? and then putting that out there as a business model that is differentiated from everybody else. This is not something that you often come up with overnight. And so again, I think this is one of those things you need to sit down and think about because it's going to take time. But, part of this is also then being honest with yourself to think about other things. Like, what size clients do you like to work for? For me, like, look, we work with clients of all sizes, but I generally like to work with small to medium-sized teams. Or if they're a team inside of a very large company, there's a distinct team that we can work with. Just because, whenever it gets into too much politics as a blood sport and red tape and things like that, this is often why creativity and corporate culture kind of rage against each other, because they often want very different things. And so for me, whenever we get to that size, that tape and politics diminish and the work is able to actually see the light of day. But I also realize that not only do I like small to medium clients, I don't want very many of them. Like, we never work on more than 3 to 4 clients at a time. And we have multiple clients right now where we're booked to the end of 2024. Because again, I just really feel like for where the industry is right now, like, scale just screws too many things up. I don't want a big office. I don't want a lot of people. I don't need that to serve my ego. I just want to do great work. I just want to work with people that I love working with, right? Like, that is really the focus for me. But I think that, one of the hardest things whenever you do all of this, and I think one of the biggest pulls, and we've talked about it with your personal brand, is for the love of God, when you get into this, just don't fucking be generic. Because so many people come out and it's like, hey, we do whatever you want us to do, and we're going to do it for whatever amount of money you'll give us. And it's just, look, people don't want to hire generic talent. They want to hire people who are killers. They want to hire people who have a point of view. They want to hire people that are coming in with some level of experience or say, look, I'm really good at X. Whatever that X is, there is a client for it. Because that has been a big shift in my thinking. Because in a lot of ways, what I thought whenever I started doing this was like, oh my God, how am I going to find a client? How am I going to find anybody that believes in me? How am I going to find anybody that wants to partner with me and do this sort of work? And it's just like, oh my God, I don't know if this is going to work. I started to shift my thinking. Because the other way to look at that problem is to say, at the end of the day, all that I need to do is to find 2, 3, 4 at most people, or 4 at most companies at any given time who want to do that work with me. Out of the millions and billions of people in the world and companies in the world and all that stuff, all I need is 2 to 4. That feels manageable, right? Like, that feels like something that I can get done. That feels like something I can be successful at. But again, that's what I said is, for me, it really is sort of trusting my gut. It was thinking through and looking at the industry of saying, what is out there? What is everybody else doing? And then how can I do something that is different? And so for me, the ability to offer this sort of like fractional leadership, because I can see there are so many companies that need senior leadership. They need that experience. They don't have the budget to hire them full-time. They've hired them full-time in the past, and that hasn't worked out. Their company isn't mature enough to be able to have that. But it doesn't mean that there still isn't a need there. So great, I can go and I can provide this fractional leadership. I can provide incredibly high quality and incredibly nimble creative. And I can be able to do a lot of these sort of things and partner with my clients and really invest in them. And like I said, provide something that clearly they're not getting someplace else, because we've had clients who have fired some of the biggest agencies in the world within a month of starting to work with us, because they were just like, holy shit, this is such a better way to do this. And I think that's a lot of what this is whenever you start to put this out there into the world, the industry is going to tell you if it's working or not. The industry is going to tell you if there's a good value proposition or there. They're going to tell you if you are priced right on some of this stuff. And so, like I said, I think you need to think about those differentiators. You need to do your research. You need to look at who else is out there. You need to look at your competitors. You need to get some data. Again, you need to treat this just like this is a design problem, because those are all the steps you should be doing in your design. But then based on that, then I think there is now the unpleasant and often unfun part of actually setting up your business as a business. And like I said, these are suggestions based on what I have done. But again, please consult real financial and legal professionals to understand the laws and regulations of where you live and get advice on what is going to be best for your situation. But the 2 people who I think are indispensable if you want to do this are an accountant and a lawyer. An accountant, because you know, look, for me, money and numbers are not my jam, right? Like, I went to art school to get away from that shit. And I think, but look, at the end of the day, you need somebody who is going to help you do things like actually set up a company. Now, if you're in the United States, most of the time this is either an LLC or an S-Corp. I personally, mine is an S Corp. The reason why you absolutely have to do this, and I get so terrified for so many people, is because this is going to allow two very important things to happen. The first is that by setting this up, this is going to give you legal protection whenever you go in and work with another company. Because if you as an individual go in and sign a contract with them and things go badly, or they pay you money and they don't feel like you deliver, they're now coming after you personally because you, as a person, signed that agreement. As opposed to when they work with me, they are signing a contract with CRZY, my studio, that is a legal entity that has, again, its own income and those sort of things. But now my family and my house and what I have is fairly protected as opposed to being completely exposed if I just sign this on my own. But the other part of this, when you start to go out on your own and you to start to think like a business person, is that whenever you form an LLC or an S Corp, that means that you get a federal tax ID number, which means you can open a business bank account, which means that now you can start to do things like buying things wholesale, starting to write off things like your internet or your cell phone or part of your home if you work from home, because now this is a company that is operating in this way. But again, this is why you need an accountant, because you will have to start to file company taxes, and those are a little bit different. You need somebody that can help with that. But again, I think that those are the sort of things that whenever you're able to get that advice, you can start to look at your bills differently. You can start to sign deals differently. You can start to buy supplies or go to Apple and get like a business discount for what that is because you're a functioning business. And so again, I think this is a little bit of getting out of the like Steve as an individual who would just go to the Apple store and buy his laptop, as opposed to Steve, who's the founder of CRZY Design, who whenever he needs a new laptop can go in through his business account and be able to buy it that way. And then again, give that to my accountant, who will then be able to amortize out the cost of that because it's a part of my business. These are the different things you need to do. But the other part of this, why you need a lawyer, is because you need somebody who will help you, one, put together documents like a statement of work or a contract, or again, like those sort of things. But you also need someone who, whenever you are given those things, because some companies just have a statement of work that they like or a contract that they like, you need somebody who can look over these documents and really understand what you are signing. Because the number of people who I've seen who have signed contracts where the people they are signing it with can terminate the contract with no written notice. They can terminate the contract without paying them the balance of whatever it is. They are, they can never show their work. They can never, there's a lot of those sort of things. And look, on some projects, no, you're not going to be able to show the work. But you need to go into this understanding what you are signing up for. That, like, for me, all of my contracts have a 30-day notice in them that if somebody wants to end the contract, it isn't just like a Wednesday and they're like, whoop, we're done. No, you have to give it to me in writing, and then there is 30 days after that for us to be able to sort of close out the relationship, because I want the 30 days to be able to go find a new client. But so again, I think that there's a lot of those sort of legal protections that you need to figure out. So again, if you're feeling overwhelmed now, just keep breathing, because like I said, we said this was going to be a lot. It's a lot. And again, you're going to do a lot of these things in order. All of this stuff does not need to happen at once. But the other biggest question I get from people about the business of a business is, Steve, how do I figure out how much to charge, right? Like, what should my hourly rate be or my weekly rate be? What should my engagement model be? Now, this is the simplest way that I know to tell you to start. Now, the simplest way to be able to do that is to go out and write down the salary you want to make in a year. So for this example, let's just say you want to make $150,000 US a year. So what I want you to be able to do is write down $150,000. Now what you want to be able to do is then go divide that by 52, because there's 52 weeks in a year, which means to make $150,000 a year, you need to make about $2,884.62 per week, roughly. But then the other thing I want to be able to have you do is then take that number, the $2,884.62, and then divide that by 40, because there's 40 hours in a week. So what that's going to do is to get you to the number of $72 an hour. Now, here is the thing that I want you to hear me on. That $72 an hour, if you want to make $150,000 a year, is the lowest hourly rate that you can charge to make that number. Now, the reason why I say lowest is because you are going to have overhead. You're going to have expenses, like if you need a Creative Cloud license or a Figma license or Zoom or Mural or, a stock photo site or Adobe stock or like whatever all those things are. Those are all overhead that you are going to need to charge for and to build into your rate above the $72. What I see too many people do is they take the $72 and go, ooh, that's what I should charge, completely forgetting about their overhead, and then at the end of the year want to know why they only made $90,000 a year. So again, that's the way you need to think about this. Now, you can also tweak that formula, because if you want to make $150,000 a year, but you only want to work 50 weeks a year, you want to say, I want to take 2 weeks off a year, or 40 weeks a year, whatever that is, right? So take the 150,000. If you only want to work 50 weeks a year, then divide that by 50. And if you only want to work 30 hours a week, then divide that by 30. You will get a higher number. But again, you can play with the weeks and hours to be able to get to sort of where it is you want to be. But like I said, that is the lowest number you can charge. So if you go under $72 an hour, or even if you stay at $72 an hour, know that you are not going to be making $150,000 a year. And like I said, it's just these are some of the things you need to think about, because there are also the other things. Like I said, you need design tools. And if you want Calendly, or if you want Zoom, or like all those other tools, those all cost things, or those all cost money. And so again, you're going to have to build that into retainers, SOWs, things like that. There's also the whole other part of this that I'm not going to be able to get into today. But again, you can also build out a real business infrastructure. I use a service called Gusto that handles all of my paid payroll. So they pay my taxes, they take out my withholdings, they pay my Social Security, they cut me a check every 2 weeks. To be able to do that, I have a 401k that's called an I-401k set up, so that, again, every month I'm paying into a 401k to preserve my retirement, just the same way that I would whenever I had a business. I have my own health insurance, right? Like I said, these things don't all have to happen at once. But these are all things that even for you as an individual, you can get set up and have coverage and all these sort of things that you had in a business to keep your future going. Because like I said, I think that's the thing, is that if this is temporary, then no, you don't have to set up all of this sort of stuff. But if you're like, look, I want this to be my business, this is what I want to be able to do, these are the things you need to be able to think about, so that, again, this is a profitable business that keeps you and your family in a really good place. Now that you, like, whenever you go through and you start to think about all this stuff, the other mistake that I see people make is they do this and they get their logo design and they get their website together and they get their differentiators together. And the first thing they do is they go running out onto LinkedIn and Twitter and Threads and whatever the hell other platform they have, and they want to go launch and tell everybody what they've done, right? They want to show off the logo and they want to do all that stuff. I want to ask you not to actually do that. What I want to be able to ask you to do is, whenever you start to get that stuff together, I want you to soft launch your freelance business, your consultancy, your studio, your whatever it is. Because what I want you to be able to do is to, one, recognize that if you go running out to LinkedIn and go throw it up in front of everybody, even if you do get a lot of interest, rarely are you probably going to get the clients you want right away. Instead, what I'm going to ask you to do is to soft launch it. Because I think the best business, the best starts, the best projects initially are going to come from your network. They're going to come from the people you know. They're going to come from the people who you've worked with before, who understand who you are. And what you want to be able to do is you want to go out and test your branding, test your name, test your value proposition, test your pricing, go do some pitches. And like I said, the market is going to tell you how you're doing. If whenever you tell people your price, they're like, wow, that's a lot more than I was thinking. Whenever you tell them what the value proposition is, if they don't seem that thrilled, if they aren't getting into a place where they really want to engage and you're seeing that reaction consistently, then you need to make sure that your differentiators are that differentiated. You need to go back and do some more research on how is it you are priced. Because also if they say yes too fast, so that means your pricing is probably too low and that they're jumping on it because they're like, ooh, that's really cheap. We should lock them up, right? So again, this is a whole balancing act, but give yourself the time to be able to go out and take that car for a test drive and see how it performs on the road, because the market is quickly going to tell you if those things are right or not. Then the best thing you can do, which is what I did, was after I had a couple clients, after I had a bunch of projects, after I did those things, then I went and made the LinkedIn page. Then I went and did all that stuff and announced it. And I sort of had to laugh because everybody was like, oh my God, you just launched this and it's amazing how quickly it came together and it's amazing how successful it's been and you have all these clients and you've done all this stuff. It's like, yeah, that, or I've been doing this for like 3 or 4 months. You got this momentum together, made sure that it worked, refined my pitch before I actually announced it to everybody else. But if you want to feel like it was this magical thing that I did overnight, like, have at it. But I think that sort of approach, I think, often works much, much better. Because look, I think one of the essential skill sets you're going to need as you go through this process is knowing that very little can be sacred. And you're going to have to really sort of just embrace being uncomfortable, because some things are going to work and you want to keep those things, right? Keep them, evolve them, really keep going with that. Some things aren't going to work and you need to get rid of those or rethink those or, figure out whatever that is. But it's going to be that constant read and react, that constant evolution. And I think that's the thing that's been so interesting for me, was because that level of uncertainty, that level of not knowing what was going on, that level of like, well, I haven't done that before, and that kind of scares me. It was such a negative whenever I began this journey. And right now, for me, I get up every single day doing things that I have never done before, being asked to take on huge problems or do whatever that is, filled with uncertainty. And man, does that fuel me, and man, is that what I love looking forward to. Because right now, like, I'm working on everything from an augmented reality installation to doing branding, to doing a documentary, to designing a restaurant, to like just the diversity of the projects is huge. And I love that I don't have reference points for this, right? Like, I love that how much work it is and how much I need to be able to figure it out and to really be able to hustle and think things through and do things that are new and different. And it's just awesome. Because I think that so much of this comes down to whenever I was in the throes of sort of searching for a job, whenever I was so frustrated and so afraid of going in this direction. I know that I've talked on this show before about a woman named Sylvia Bafor. And Sylvia is an amazing, amazing expert in emotional intelligence. She has a book called I Dare You to Care. She has an incredible podcast. But she's somebody I'm incredibly fortunate to be able to take on as counsel and somebody to talk to. And as I went through this process, I really was like, Sylvia, I don't know what I want to be able to do. I can't find a job. I can't find anything that's inspiring me. I can't find anybody I want to work for. Like, I don't know what it is I want to do. Like, there's this other stuff, but I'm scared of it. And it's just, she hit me with this line that I've repeated in talks. I'll repeat it here. I'm sure I'll repeat it on the show again, which is, she has said, Steve, you need to remember that discomfort is the cost of fulfillment. Because I think that often it is people who want something different, who are so unhappy with where they are, who want to try something different, but are afraid of that discomfort. And that's the thing that I had to remind myself of. Because, like, look, you want to talk about some fucking atomic imposter syndrome? Try doing this show for 7 years and standing on stages pretending to be an expert around all this stuff, and then just consistently through this process having so many problems with imposter syndrome and confidence and other things like that. It's just a real kick in the shorts. But look, I think that this is where you need to be honest with yourself about what you want and what you want to be, what you need to be happy. You need to be realistic about those things. And you need to remember that those things are going to be on the other side of that discomfort. It's going to be on the other side of that risk. Because again, I think, like, for me, I continue to, as I have with so much of my career, to really embrace the fact that at the end of the day, I just want to be known for being crazy but not stupid. That all it really came down to, and I think this was kind of the most sobering realization in a lot of things in my life over the last year. Whether it was leaving New York to come home to Pittsburgh, whether it was starting my own studio, whether it was doing so many of those other things, so much of what those things are, what it came down to, or if I was really being brutally honest with myself, what I was afraid of was I was afraid to believe in my talent. I was afraid to bet on myself. Could I be successful and still be taken seriously if I wasn't if I wasn't in New York City and I wasn't just located there? Even the fact that I hadn't worked in the city in years and lived outside of it, but could I still be taken seriously if I lived in Pittsburgh and not New York? Like, how would people react whenever they said, "Where do you live?" and I didn't say New York, and they went, "Ooh," because sometimes you say Pittsburgh, and they go, "Oh." I think that, could I bet on myself to be able to do good enough work, to hustle, to build the relationships, to really do so much of what I talk about and have done for so long, but to really do it unaided, right, with no parachute? Could I bet on myself? That was a real hard and sobering realization, to realize that that's what the resistance in this process was for me. Did I just believe in myself? Did I believe I could do it? Was I willing to take that risk and to lean in to try those things? And again, I think whenever I talk to a lot of other people, I recognize that same symptom. Because look, the unknown is hard. Hope is more work. And discomfort is not fun. But the one thing I can tell you from somebody that's on the other side of it, and look, and your results will vary, but I am having more fun. I'm doing better work. And it was, for me, being able to finally be honest about what I need to be happy, to prioritize my happiness, my creativity, my family, my mental health. These things were long overdue. And the funny thing is, by once again prioritizing those things, by once again getting back to an environment that really focused on those things, gee, is it not the least bit surprising that great work follows? And that's what I said. I want everybody to be able to think about that, to be brave enough to believe in yourself, to be able to think about those things, to find that moment. Like for me, that moment in the morning where I was laying there with my alarm clock trying to process the day and what that meant. But to just have that conversation with yourself. It doesn't have to be all at once. You don't have to do it fast. But just be brave enough to believe in yourself. Because I think that's what this show is about. I think that's what so many of these conversations have tried to be about. Right, is to give people the advice or to give them the encouragement to be who they are, to believe in their talent, to take the risk, to take the leap, to be the one who is crazy enough to believe in themselves. Because I think that's the hard part, right? Because for so many of us, doing what we want, saying what that is almost an act of will and rebellion. And damn if it isn't fun to be able to do it. So, look, if this is a process you're going through, as always, you'd feel free to reach out to me. You can find me most days on Instagram and LinkedIn are probably the two most popular ones for me. Instagram always still gets a little bit weird with messaging and stuff like that, but you can always email me through the site or the show or whatever it is. I got some talks coming up, any of those sort of things. So just think about it. And like I said, I hope this offers a level of detail or a starter kit to be able to start this process that maybe will give you a little bit more confidence that you can do it. So, as always, everybody down in legal wants me to remind you that the views here are just my own. They don't represent any of my current or former employers. That this is just me out here talking. We'll skip the rest of the closing of the show, mostly because I'm never convinced that anybody actually stays that long. And as soon as it sounds like I'm wrapping up the show, they are out of here. But look, I say it every time because I mean it every time. But now more than ever, I'm incredibly appreciative and humbled by your time. I know that time is the only real luxury that we have, and I was incredibly humbled you want to spend any of it with me. So think about it. Think about what you want. Think about if maybe making that move finally is the thing that you need to be able to get to a much better place, to get to some happiness, be a little bit crazy, and to be able to believe in yourself for a change. I'm here for it, and I damn sure believe in you that I think you can do it. But hey, as always, and we'll have some more shows coming up soon, so stay crazy.